I've spoken already about the different contexts in which voluntaries are performed. Now I'm going to say a few words about some considerations you might bear in mind when you're choosing repertoire. First of all, how long should you play for? Well, I spoke already about the pre-service music. It really depends on how much time you have, how early you start playing before the service. It is quite nice for people to come into the church and hear the organ playing. It really sets the scene for the service. At a reflective point in the service, such as the distribution of communion, the length will be decided by how long the particular section of the service lasts. This can be a little bit difficult because the precise length of your voluntary is unlikely to match the precise length of time required. There are a few ways around this. If you have a way of judging how long more you might need to play, for example, if you have a mirror, you can see how many people are still yet to receive communion, for example. You might realize that you need perhaps another minute or so of music. In that case, you might go back to a particular point of your voluntary and repeat, perhaps on a different registration. Or you might improvise a short link if, for example, you only need to cover a matter of maybe 10 or 20 seconds. This is something that's worth practicing so that you can respond in the particular situation. At the end of the service, as I mentioned already, it's best to avoid voluntaries that are very long and continually loud. And so it's better to pick something that's short or something that has contrast. A lot of voluntaries take the form ABA, in which you have an opening section, often loud, a B section, often quiet and contrasting, and an A section which repeats much of the material of the opening section. In a case like that, it's good to choose your registration carefully so that the B section provides a contrast. In terms of the difficulty of the repertoire, it's always worth choosing something that is well within your abilities, something that you can learn without unnecessary stress, and something that you can play effectively. Therefore, collections like those I mentioned, the graded organ anthologies or the Oxford Service Music books and similar series, can be very useful because they present music of similar difficulty. In terms of choosing the style of the piece, there is, of course, 5 or 6 centuries worth of organ music to choose from. Many organists will have a particular affinity for one particular era, and indeed you need to bear in mind the style of the organ you have. You might have an organ that can play Baroque music very well, or maybe an organ that can play Romantic music very well, depending on the style of the stops and the voicing. But it's worth considering your own particular interests, what sounds good on the organ, and also how well the music you choose might fit in with the service. You don't want anything that would jar with the tone of the service. You don't want music, for example, that's too solemn for a joyful occasion, or indeed music that is too bright for a solemn occasion. One very useful thing to bear in mind when choosing repertoire is the idea of seasonal repertoire, choosing music that might have a resonance with the particular time of the church year or the particular feast. There are many publications which have compiled selections of music, for example, for Christmas, for Lent, for Easter, for other feasts. There are also collections of music specifically chosen as final voluntaries, and also collections of music such as this one, the Oxford Book of Funeral and Memorial Music for Organ. This is part of a series of books which present repertoire of different styles. There's also books of Christmas music, books of ceremonial music, and so on. These collections will be very useful for you in choosing music that's appropriate to a particular occasion. Something I haven't mentioned yet, of course, is weddings. Wedding organ music is a whole genre in itself, and there are many useful books, but you will find that couples tend to choose the same few old favourites. So it's useful to have all of those in one good volume. The collections that I've talked about so far are mostly recent publications, but the music contained within these publications is often out of copyright. Therefore, this music can be found for free on the internet. The best resource of free music online is IMSLP, the International Music Score Library Project. There are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of scores to be found for all instruments and all combinations, and music that comes from all centuries up as far as the 20th century. The music on IMSLP is available free of charge because it is no longer in copyright. IMSLP is a treasure trove of music for any performer, and particularly for organists, but it can be a little bewildering because there are so many pieces to choose from, so many composers, and it is difficult to navigate. Some things that might be worth looking for on IMSLP are the Village Organist volumes, which are publications from the late 19th century, which include mixtures of original organ music and arrangements of popular orchestral pieces. There are also the various colour-coded collections of recital music. You have the Red Book and the Yellow Book and so on, and all these collections are available on IMSLP, and there is a huge array of really very interesting and very useful organ voluntary material in these collections. It's worth browsing IMSLP and looking around to see what you can find, and perhaps saving or printing some of these scores so that you can try them out yourself on the organ. In the description of this video, you'll find a link to the Church Music Dublin website, where we have a list of resources for organ voluntaries, particularly those that are available online. You may find after a couple of years of playing the organ that you start returning to the same pieces, ones that you particularly enjoy playing, ones that members of the congregation particularly appreciate, and ones that you feel particularly match certain occasions. It's quite useful to keep a record of the pieces that you play week by week so that you can look back on this for ideas in years to come. You will sometimes find, as I find myself, that there are pieces that you've just simply forgotten about that are very appropriate, so it's a useful way of keeping on top of your own repertoire. It's also useful to have a few pieces up your sleeve, as it were, for occasions like weddings and funerals. Particularly at weddings, where you may have to play for quite a long time before the service. You might like to choose a selection of music appropriate to the occasion, joyful background music essentially, and you might like to keep these in one volume or in a folder or in some place that's easily accessible. As an organist, you'll appreciate how much effort goes into the preparation of organ voluntaries, and so it's nice when these voluntaries are acknowledged and appreciated by the members of the congregation. A couple of things to bear in mind might be drawing the attention of members of the congregation to your voluntaries so that they perhaps understand why you've chosen a particular piece for a particular occasion. You could include the name of your voluntary on the service sheet, and if there's space, you could even include a short note about the piece, maybe explaining why you chose it, or explaining, for example, the particular significance of the piece to the time of the year. You might mention that it's a German chorale tune which is associated with Advent, for example, if you're choosing a piece like Nun komm der Heiden Heiland. Including your organ voluntaries on the service sheets can also be a useful way of motivating yourself to learn new repertoire or to practice repertoire that you haven't played in a while. If you don't have service sheets, perhaps it might be worth asking the person leading the service occasionally to mention the organ voluntary and perhaps say a couple of words about it. That might encourage people to stay behind at the end of the service, to listen to your voluntary, and also for them to pay more attention to the music that you play during the service.